Drake just did something that has the internet convinced he has completely lost the plot. And honey, once you hear what it actually is, you're going to need a seat. Because Drake, the same man who spent 2 years telling everybody he was misunderstood, just quietly liked a post claiming that Kendrick Lamar was nothing but a pawn. Not a rival, not a competitor, a pawn, a piece being moved by somebody else's hand the entire time. And the person supposedly moving that piece? Jay-Z. Yes, the same Jay-Z that wasn't even a topic of conversation when this whole thing kicked off. Grab whatever you're drinking, because we need to talk about this, and we need to talk about it right now. Let's rewind, because the way certain people are trying to rewrite history is genuinely wild. When this beef started, nobody, and I mean nobody, was thinking about Jay-Z. Nobody was thinking about Roc Nation. Nobody was thinking about the Super Bowl, because the Super Bowl booking didn't even exist yet as a topic. What existed was two men, Drake and Kendrick Lamar, going at each other's throats over things that had clearly been simmering for years behind closed doors. That's it. That's the whole cast at the start of this story. 2 names. Not 3, not 4, just 2. Drake and Kendrick Lamar. So when the sixth god turns around, years later, and starts liking posts that suggest Kendrick Lamar was secretly working for somebody else this entire time, the internet is right to ask, "Sir, are you okay?" Because that is not how any of this went down, and everybody who is actually paying attention in real time knows it. And before anybody says this is just one random post, let's be clear about something. Public figures with this much reach do not accidentally engage with narratives they disagree with. Every like is a signal. Every like tells millions of followers exactly where the account holder's head is at. So when this particular post gets a like from this particular account, that's not an accident. That's a message, whether he wants to admit it publicly or not. Here's the promise I'm making you right now. By the end of this, you are going to understand exactly why this new narrative Drake is pushing doesn't hold up, why the timeline itself destroys the theory, and why this latest move says a lot more about Drake's state of mind than it does about Kendrick Lamar or Jay-Z. Stay with me, because it gets messier the deeper we go. So let's talk about what actually happened. Drake never really stood a chance once things escalated, and deep down, most people believe he knows that. Now here's where it gets interesting, because after Kendrick Lamar won that battle so decisively, everything else started happening. The culture shifted almost overnight. Kendrick Lamar's victory record, Not Like Us, became one of the biggest cultural moments of the decade. It wasn't just a song anymore. It became an anthem, played everywhere from clubs to stadiums to backyard. This is about a narrative that lets Drake feel a little bit better about a loss that the entire internet watched happen in real time. If Kendrick Lamar was just a pawn, then somehow the loss doesn't sting as much, right? If there was a bigger, scarier force behind the scenes the whole time, then maybe Drake wasn't really beaten by one man. He was beaten by an entire machine. That's the story he wants people to run with. That's the story he wants his fans posting on every timeline, every comment section, every group chat. But it's not the truth, and deep down, I think even Drake knows it's not the truth. Because think about it logically for 1 second. If there truly was somebody controlling the board, moving pieces around before the battle even began, wouldn't there have been some kind of sign of it at the time? Wouldn't insiders, leakers, industry sources, somebody, have caught wind of a grand plan being orchestrated from the top? Instead, what we got was 2 artists releasing songs back to back to back in real time, reacting to each other, adjusting to each other, escalating with each other. That's not the rhythm of a scripted, controlled operation. That's the rhythm of 2 competitors genuinely trying to bury each other, with zero puppet master pulling strings from a boardroom somewhere. And listen, this is where the pattern with Drake becomes impossible to ignore, because this isn't the first time he's tried to shift blame away from himself. Remember, Drake actually took things a step further and filed a lawsuit against his own label, Universal Music Group, essentially trying to argue. So now, with that avenue closed off, guess what happens next? A brand new name gets thrown into the blame pile. First it was the label. Now it's Jay-Z. At what point does the actual person responsible for starting this whole situation get held accountable for starting it? Because here's the thing that a lot of people are picking up on, and it's honestly starting to look a little familiar. Drake blaming outside forces instead of accepting the loss is starting to resemble the exact same playbook used by his own longtime associate, academics. who is notorious for spinning narratives to protect certain artists regardless of what actually happened. When you start sounding like academics, that's a red flag. That's a sign that the story being told isn't really about the facts anymore. It's about protecting an image. And that's really what this all comes back to, isn't it? Protecting the image. Drake has spent years building a persona of the guy who always wins, the guy who has the bigger numbers, the bigger streams, the bigger tours. But this one battle, this one loss to Kendrick Lamar, punctured that image in a way that nothing else really has. And instead of sitting with that discomfort, instead of just saying, I lost, I got outworked, I got outwritten, Drake keeps reaching for anything that will soften the blow. First, it's the label pumping numbers. Now it's Jay-Z pulling strings. Next, it'll probably be somebody else entirely, because that's the pattern. Blame the system, blame the label, blame the industry insider, blame anybody whose name isn't Aubrey. Let's talk about that nickname for a second, because it matters here. People online have started calling him by his actual first name, Aubrey, specifically in moments like this, almost as a way of stripping away the persona and getting to the real person underneath. Aubrey started this. Aubrey provoked this. Aubrey thought he could talk his way through a war he started, and when it didn't work out, Aubrey started looking for anybody else to hold the bag. That's not a Drake problem exclusively, by the way. That's a very human problem, wanting to protect your ego at all costs. But when you're one of the biggest artists on the planet with millions of people watching every move you make, every like, every comment, every subtle narrative push gets magnified into something much bigger. Let's also sit with just how far back the actual tension between these two goes, because this beef did not begin the week the first official diss track dropped. Longtime fans of both camps can point to years of subtle digs buried inside guest verses, festival stage comments, interviews where a name would come up just enough to make people speculate, and moments where one camp seemed to go out of its way to avoid crediting the other. That slow burn history is exactly why, when the floodgates finally opened, it felt less like a sudden explosion and more like a long overdue eruption. Two men who had been circling each other for the better part of a decade finally stepped into the same ring at the same time, and everybody who had been paying attention immediately understood the stakes. And speaking of who Drake does and doesn't blame, this is where things get almost comedic if you sit back and really look at it. Drake has, at various points, suggested that people connected to Roc Nation are against him. He's implied that anybody who supported Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl moment is somehow aligned against him. He's treated label affiliations like team jerseys, assuming that if you share a business relationship with somebody on the other side of this beef, you must automatically be an enemy. Except there's one massive exception to this rule, and it's Future. Future worked extensively with Kendrick Lamar's collaborators. Future has been tied into that entire ecosystem in various ways. And yet Future remains one of the people Drake continues to work with, continues to be close with, continues to make music alongside. So which is it? Is proximity to Kendrick Lamar's camp a disqualifier, or isn't it? Because right now it seems like the rule only applies to people Drake has already decided to be upset with, and gets conveniently ignored for anybody he still wants in his corner. That's not consistency, that's convenience. It's honestly kind of sad when you step back and look at the bigger picture here, because Drake has released multiple projects since this all went down. He put out music where he addressed heartbreak, addressed industry pressure, addressed all sorts of personal struggles, seemingly trying to move forward. And yet here we are, still watching him engage with posts that reopen the exact same wound, still watching him chase a version of events where he's not really the one who lost. He's the victim of some grand conspiracy involving one of the most powerful men in the music business. At some point, doesn't it become healthier, doesn't it become more respectable, to simply say, I started something, I misjudged how it would go, and I have to live with the outcome. That's called accountability, and it's something Drake has consistently struggled to demonstrate throughout this entire saga. Because let's be real about how this all began. This wasn't Jay-Z's war. This wasn't Roc Nation's war. This was a war that Drake and Kendrick Lamar built between themselves, brick by brick, verse by verse, over the course of years, long before either of them ever dropped a single official diss track. All those subtle shots, all those sneak disses buried inside verses that fans had to slow down and analyze frame by frame, all of that tension had been quietly stacking up. And when it finally reached its breaking point, It wasn't some outside force that lit the fuse, it was the two of them, and only the two of them. So when Drake starts entertaining the idea that Kendrick Lamar was merely a piece on somebody else's chessboard, he's not just rewriting Kendrick Lamar's story, he's rewriting his own. Because if Kendrick Lamar was just a pawn, then what does that make Drake? The guy who lost to a pawn? That doesn't exactly help the narrative he's trying to build either way you slice it. It's almost like Drake hasn't fully thought through what this theory actually implies about himself. Now, some people online are already pushing back, saying that maybe there's a shred of truth buried somewhere in this idea. Maybe Jay-Z did have some kind of longer-term interest in seeing Kendrick Lamar rise, given the business ties between Roc Nation and various entertainment platforms. And sure, businesses look out for talent that benefits them. That's not exactly a shocking revelation in this industry. But wanting to work with a winner after they've already proven themselves a winner is a completely different thing from secretly orchestrating that person's rise from the very beginning of a rap battle nobody could have predicted the outcome of. Timing matters. Sequence matters. And in this case, the sequence tells the real story, whether Drake wants to accept it or not. Let's also talk about how convenient this timing is, because it's not like this theory is popping up out of nowhere at a random moment. It's popping up after Drake's lawsuit against Universal got tossed out. It's popping up after months of Drake seemingly trying to move past the loss publicly while privately still stewing over it. It's popping up right when a new wave of internet conversation about the battle resurfaces every few months like clockwork. This isn't a coincidence, honey. This is a pattern of behavior where Drake resurfaces old wounds every time a new opportunity to shift blame presents itself. And here's the thing that really gets people heated in the comment sections every single time this topic comes back around. Nobody is saying Drake isn't talented. Nobody is denying the catalog, the hits, the influence he's had on the culture for over a decade. That's not what this is about. This is specifically about accountability for one specific chapter of his career where he started something, got mashed at every turn, and ultimately lost decisively in the court of public opinion. Being a talented artist and being somebody who struggles to accept a loss gracefully are not mutually exclusive traits. And honestly, watching somebody with that much success still refuse to just own an L is almost more surprising than if he'd never achieved anything at all. There's also the matter of how Kendrick Lamar himself has handled all of this, because notice the difference in energy here. While Drake keeps circling back around to this loss, keeps engaging with theories, keeps subtly keeping the conversation alive through likes and rumored studio comments, Kendrick Lamar has mostly just kept moving. He toured. He performed the Super Bowl set that had the entire country talking. He continued dropping music that didn't feel like it was still relitigating a fight that, by every measure, he already won. That contrast alone tells you a lot about who actually needed closure here and who has already gotten it. One man is living in the aftermath of his biggest victory. The other man appears to still be negotiating with himself about how the story should be told. So where does this actually leave things? It leaves us with a narrative battle happening on top of the original battle. The original battle was about bars, about wordplay, about who could land the more devastating blow on wax. This new battle is about who gets to control the story afterward, who gets remembered as the true architect of everything that followed. And based on the actual sequence of events, based on what was public knowledge and what wasn't at each individual stage, the answer remains the same as it's always been. Kendrick Lamar built his own path forward off the strength of what he did in that battle. Nobody handed him a script. Nobody moved him into position like a piece on a board. He earned every single result that followed, the song, the momentum, the massive stage, all of it, because he won a fight that was entirely his own to win or lose. Meanwhile, Drake continues doing what he's always done when things don't go his way, looking outward instead of inward. Blame the label. Blame the industry. Blame Jay-Z. Blame anybody who isn't Aubrey. It's become almost predictable at this point, and predictable narratives tend to lose their power the more times they get repeated without any actual proof behind them. Now, here's a question worth sitting with, and I genuinely want to know what you think in the comments. Does Drake? That's a tactic, not an accident. Drake has used that playbook before, and he's clearly not done using it now. At the end of the day, the truth of what happened between Drake and Kendrick Lamar remains exactly what it's always been. Two men, one battle, one clear outcome. Everything that came afterward, The Super Bowl, the cultural wave, Jay-Z's involvement, all of it happened because Kendrick Lamar won on his own merit first. Trying to insert a puppet master into a story that never needed one doesn't change what already happened. It just reveals who still hasn't made peace with it. There's one more angle worth putting on the table before we wrap this up, because it says something about the broader hip-hop landscape right now. Rap beefs used to end the moment the last diss track dropped. Whoever landed the final blow got the win, the other side absorbed the loss, and the culture moved on to whatever came next. That's not how this generation of internet-driven rap beef works anymore. Now the beef doesn't actually end, it just goes dormant, waiting for the next post, the next like, the next interview clip to reignite the entire conversation all over again. Drake liking this particular post is proof of exactly that phenomenon. 2 years removed from the actual battle, and it still only takes one tap of a thumb to get the entire internet talking about Drake and Kendrick Lamar again. In a strange way, that's a testament to just how massive this battle actually was. Nobody's still talking about most rap beefs 2 years later. People are still talking about this one because Kendrick Lamar's win was that definitive, and because Drake, for whatever reason, still can't seem to fully let it go. And that's honestly the most telling part of this entire story. If Drake had truly moved on the way his recent album talked about moving on, this post wouldn't have gotten a like from him in the first place. He would have scrolled right past it. Instead, he stopped, he engaged, and in doing so, he handed the internet a brand new reason to relive his biggest professional loss all over again. Nobody forced his hand here. Nobody baited him into it publicly. He did that entirely on his own, which honestly might be the most Drake thing about this whole situation. Even when he's trying to protect his image, he somehow ends up drawing more attention to the exact thing he's trying to protect it from. So tell me honestly, do you think Drake genuinely believes Kendrick Lamar was somebody's pawn? Or do you think this is just another chapter in a very long pattern of avoiding accountability? Drop your take in the comments below, because I already know this section is about to get heated, and honestly, that's exactly why we're here. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update the moment this story develops further, because knowing this industry, it's not staying quiet for long.